We'll start the meeting and read a statement regarding Zoom meetings. On June 16th, 2021, Governor Baker signed into law an act extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency. This act includes an extension until April 1st, 2022 of the remote meeting provisions of his March 12th, 2020 executive order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law. This is an entirely Zoom meeting and is not attended at a particular location. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. All right, we'll start with a roll call opening up. Robert?
Here.
Nate?
Here.
Jack?
Here.
George?
Here.
I am here obviously as well, and Brian is on extended leave. Okay, first order of business is Jeff Colby, DPW, and all the different division heads that he manages. Jeff, you want to get us started, or was there anything that Bill or Bob wanted to say before we jump in?
I'm all set. I'm ready to share the screen for Jeff for his presentation.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Great. It's all yours, Jeff.
All right. Thank you very much for having us tonight. With us is Roby Whitehouse, Assistant DPW Director. Also have Amanda Lima, Town Engineer, and Lori Rosala is our Water and Wastewater Superintendent. So we've done some restructuring, and those are the three major divisions within the DPW. And we'll be presenting this this presentation to you. I'll cover it pretty quickly, and they'll be available for any detailed questions you might have about specific budgets. But this is just our mission statement. I won't read that to you. It hasn't changed, but we are primarily infrastructure focused and a customer service focused organization.
Jeff, if I may, Jeff had sent me an updated presentation. It might differ slightly from what you got received in the packet. It's aligned with the items you have in your book.
Okay, thank you, Bill. I just want to recap a few of the things that have been ongoing. One of them is the DPW building project. We had a ribbon cutting this November, and we're in there. I'm actually in the office right now. It's a excellent building that will meet the needs of the DPW and the town for many years to come. So we're very, very happy with it. Parkers River Bridge is substantially complete. There is some things to finish up in the spring once the growing season hits and clean up, but that's a nice project to get under our belt as well. Higgins Kroll Shared Use Path Phase 1 has been completed. That's a multi-phase program, so there'll be a couple of additional pieces of that as funding becomes available. Another highlight is that we've done 19 miles of pavement maintenance work. That's typical for us, 19 to 20 miles each year, primarily using the road maintenance money that's provided. Police station HVAC system, that's approximately $3 million project that we've started to work on. About halfway through on that project and hope to complete that this spring. It's sorely needed, and there will help them both with the heating and the cooling components of that building that have been problematic for a long time. Pump stations, we've started or just about completed phase 1 of that rehab project, and phase 2 has been awarded. Those are some long needed improvements at the wells for our water system. And then we also, as the Finance Committee is well aware, had OPM and wastewater treatment facility design funding approved. And so we're going through that process of selecting an OPM, and we are looking forward to making a recommendation in the very near future to the Board of Selectmen in that regard. Then we'll move on to the designer of the facility as we go through a process to select that, and the collection system design is ongoing. I'll also give you a snapshot. I think I provided this slide last year as well, just the various things that we do within Public Works. There's a number of public buildings that are maintained, 17, as you can see there, parks and beaches, at least 26 of those, and 7 active cemeteries. So that's a busy group there. As far as roads, we have approximately 240 miles that we maintain, as well as dealing with snow and ice. And we're right in the midst of that season right now and getting ready for a potential good size event this weekend. Waste management, there's some information with regards to the volumes of trash as well as construction demolition material that have been brought in over the last year, as well as the septage volumes. And so those are basically our volume-based divisions. And you can see that we've do quite a bit with regards to treating septage as well as pumping water. As we get into the budgets here, as Bill mentioned earlier, there's going to be a couple of differences as I updated the numbers within this presentation. I was a little under the weather last week, and so I need to apologize, but the presentation that was forwarded to you had a couple of errors in it. This one is correct that you'll see tonight. The facilities budget, it was not one of the ones that was updated, but as you can see, wages have gone down slightly, and that's because we've had a retirement and a facilities supervisor was reclassified in that position. There are some minor contractual adjustments, but generally that wages is down. Expenses are up slightly. We've got a new contract for custodial services, and we also expect the cost of those services to go up. So there's some increases with regards to the expenses for that item. I don't know if you want me to pause between each one of the budgets we have. We have quite a few to go through tonight, or if you want me to cover kind of each one, I'm happy to take questions as we go. I don't know how you want to handle that.
And just a heads up, each one of these, it's not the overall DPW is division as per the name and the fund on the top, but I think we'll move forward, Jeff, and then unless the board wants to ask questions of each division.
Well, I think that
Okay.
there are a couple of questions that were already sent ahead of time. So to whatever extent you can weave those answers in to the appropriate department, but if not, we can certainly circle back.
Okay, I'll hit the next one then.
Well, I can weave one of the answers into this particular component. One of the questions was if we had additional funds, where would we spend that? And certainly facilities is one of those pieces that certainly could use some additional funds. There is some additional funds that were added to this budget, but certainly staff support is, this would be the #1 priority within the DPW for adding additional staff. We just have a number of aging facilities within the community, whether it's multiple fire stations that are aging, as well as a senior center that needs ongoing and regular maintenance, 2 libraries, a police station, which I mentioned briefly about the HVAC project, but just the building generally needs quite a bit of maintenance, as well as town hall, where we're there quite a bit dealing with maintenance. So additional staffing as it relates to facilities would certainly be top on our priority list. I would say just generally, most of our divisions need additional staff, but this is certainly one of our #1 priorities with regards to that.
And I guess the follow-up to that, Jeff, would just be, is there anything extra that you could do if we invested in additional facilities staff that would allow you to do things that would ultimately end up providing additional revenue back to the town?
Yeah, that's a difficult one because facilities is one that does not provide much revenue currently. I don't know that there is a lot of opportunities in this particular division to provide revenue. That's going to be different in some of our other divisions that we'll cover today. And one of my last slides that you probably saw in the packet and I updated for this presentation is the revenues. And we have significant revenues that DPW brings in, but not in this particular division. So I guess the short answer to that question is probably not for facilities. These are just public buildings. And unless we started to charge police and fire or town administration to maintain some of those things, I'm not exactly sure how we would raise revenue in that regard.
No, it could be.
Raise a related question then. Are there some things that could be done, let's say, under your purview that might be currently being done under individual departments? What comes to mind right now is the fire department keeps talking about a need to consolidate their dispatching in one location. They're talking about using the third floor of the new station across the street from you. And also consolidating the police department. Although that's mentioned every year, it doesn't seem like that's anything that has been looked at in depth, I guess. So that may not be able to generate extra revenue, but I would think it would be able to save us some operating costs and maybe some potential costs if we had flooding problems.
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that. Reason I don't look at these things, kind of in a vacuum or just within DPW. One of the reasons I prioritize requests for staffing with facilities being number one is because both the police chief and fire chief indicated that they'd like to see additional staff. They have service requests out for working on their buildings that are taking quite a bit of time to get to. And in previous budget cycles, both chiefs were very vocal that this was an important component that they'd like to see additional staff. In fact, the police chief wanted to see one facilities person just for their building. And I'd suggest the best way to do that is not have a person per building, but to centralize that function so that we can do the best job we can managing all the buildings with the staff that we have, not dedicating particular staff to a building. We have a little bit of that happening currently over at the senior center. There is a maintenance person that doesn't report to DPW, but they are part-time over at the senior center. And so the more we can do with centralizing, the better we can do using those resources collectively. So
Yeah,
that would be my thoughts.
Jeff, that's actually right, the kind of the line of thinking and questions that we were asking police and fire last week, because their presentation was talking about having someone to, I think, not just manage facilities, but and I don't know, you consider this under the heading of facilities, but mechanic for the fire rigs as well as for the police cars. And so I would just ask you, is that something that you feel like you would be able to do under the auspices of your department?
Yeah, that's a great point. That's my second priority with regards to personnel. Currently, we have 2 mechanics that are within the highway division. There's also a police mechanic that doesn't report to DPW, but does do work on police vehicles and some other vehicles as he's able to with his time. They're all 3 of them are out of the new maintenance facility here at the DPW. And if you haven't seen that maintenance facility, I'm happy to take anybody through that. It's a state-of-the-art facility that can certainly accommodate those, 3 mechanics, and probably could even add a 4th mechanic pretty easily without much of a problem. There are 4 full maintenance bays in that facility. And so that's my second suggestion, would be to do more of a centralized maintenance approach. You'll see that in a later slide. I do have some recommendations of things I think would help us handle some of the challenges. We could centralize some of the costs associated with in the different departments with regard to vehicle maintenance and save some money by doing that in-house. We'd have to bring another mechanic on because when we were building this building, or when we were designing this building, Weston and Sampson did an analysis for us. And the analysis they did was, hey, if the town were to maintain all of the vehicles they have with in-house, how many mechanics would that take? And that vehicle maintenance report said it would take 8 mechanics. Well, we're definitely not going to have 8 mechanics, but we can do more in-house by adding some mechanics. Right now, we contract out, or the town of Yarmouth contracts out, a fair amount of vehicle maintenance that I feel we could do a better job by keeping some of that in-house. So yeah, that would be one of my recommendations.
Terrific. Thank you, Jeff. Please continue.
Stephanie, can I step in for a second?
Of course, Nate, go ahead.
Okay, this is for Bob and Bill, and also for Jeff. We submit, or we pay a lot of money to the VOTEC each year to support the VOTEC and support the Yarmouth students and stuff like that. Do we have a program where we could go there and either apprenticeship those students, or look at hiring those students when they graduate to fill in the needed people, and keep, we're already paying for it. Why don't we use the people if we can find the proper, I don't know how to say, but, you know, nurture those people that come forth and to be able to stay in the town. And do we have a restriction in the contracts that says that we can't do apprenticeships? Or that we can't do, you know, bringing them in a couple weeks and then a couple weeks at school and this, that, and the other, to try to help them and help us out too with the staffing. I'm thinking about the beach in the summer. I'm thinking about the golf course, the cemeteries. I'm thinking about maybe some of Jeff's, or the recycle center. They have a sign right now that looking for people, I believe, if they haven't found anybody. But is this a possible source of possible employees that we might look at? Thank you.
Great
Yeah, I would say,
question.
Mike, the short answer is yes, it's a possibility. It's something that we've certainly considered. One of the challenges that we have is the town is required to bring people on full-time that are fully qualified. And for public works, in many cases, that's a specific license, whether it's a mechanic's license or a driver's license, a commercial driver's license, or construction supervisor license. So, you know, that's something that we need to consider as we look at the full-time. But as far as internships and part-time, as well as seasonal opportunities, we do have those opportunities that we're exploring. In fact, Amanda could probably comment on some things she's looking at with regards to internships for engineers. So we are exploring some of those opportunities, and I think it's a great idea, and hopefully we can do more of it in the future.
And just to follow up, Jeff, is that requirement about bringing them on full-time a state statute? Is it a union contract issue? Where's that requirement come from?
The limitations with regards to licensing are written into job descriptions that we have, and those job descriptions are do get signed off by the union. So we have established job descriptions with particular license requirements in them. Some of those licenses you can't get straight out of high school. You actually have to have some experience in order to get that. And a good example is that construction supervisor license I mentioned. You actually need 3 years within the field before you can go and sit for the test. So there's those types of challenges we need to work through, but I do think there's a path forward to making some adjustments or to bring people in certain capacities rather than just the full-time positions that we have that are available. So we're looking at those things.
Excellent. That might be a broader question to explore with maybe some other departments at some point once we get through the budget.
So if there's no other questions on facilities, we can move forward to the next one, which is trees. This is a relatively small budget. It's historically been about $10,000, as you can see on this slide here. In FY22, because of some fiscal budget challenges, that was completely cut out. So you'll see the zero under FY22. But $10,000 was able to be reestablished into this tree account. I will say that's insufficient to cover our yearly tree management. Typically, over the last 5 years, that's been about $50,000. And that has been supplemented in order to get to that number with free cash requests. So you'll see later in the presentation that in order to get to a better number for annual maintenance and planting of trees, that closer to the 50,000 number would be what we would need. But I see adding something back in this year is better than nothing. So we're headed in the right direction on this budget. So if there's no questions on trees, we can move forward to the next budget. The next budget is DPW Engineering Admin. It's Fund 421. There are significant changes within the wages, but that was primarily because of the restructuring that we did that I mentioned at the beginning when I did the introductions. The assistant DPW director is now under this budget. Roby's previously was paid under sanitation. And there was some other restructuring that went on there in previous budget cycles, including last year, some funds for engineering, for civil engineer or part-time engineer that we had. were paid for out of water. And so there's adjustments here, putting that back into the engineering admin budget versus, hiding those in other budgets that had been done over the last, 10 years or so, because of some fiscal challenges. So that's returned to this budget. That's why there's an increase in wages. It's not an increase in headcount. It's simply, where people are paid out of. As far as the expenses, that's relatively flat. The expense item is a large item because that includes fuel cost in there, as well as electricity for street lights and traffic signals and those types of things. Then it's a little bit lower than the actual, or I should say the actual is quite a bit lower than the budget and what's being proposed because of the volatility related to fuel costs. We are seeing that increase pretty significantly. So although the FY21 expense number is low, I expect it to be much closer to the budget over the next year because of some of those increases in fuel costs.
Jeff, could I pause and ask you, I know this is one of the slides that is different from what we had initially received. Are the numbers that we're seeing that are different between this updated slide and what we received a reflection of just some errors, or is it a reflection of, say, an FY21 and FY22, adjusting for that consolidation? You're trying to do it apples to apples.
The differences between what you received and what you see before you is just capturing of different numbers within the budget. The way it was printed out from the Munis sheet, it captured the part-time engineer position, as I mentioned, kind of in a different line from the full-time wages. And so that's the difference that you see in the wage line. The differences in the expenses was also somewhat related to just the way it printed out. So what needed to happen last week before this was finalized was just a better kind of vetting of those numbers, making sure we're capturing the right ones. There wasn't any significant changes. It was just the way it was shown in the presentation didn't properly reflect what was in Munis.
Okay, thank you.
So if
Jeff,
there's
maybe
no
another way
other-
to ask that question is, since you moved some expenses into this account, is there someplace else in the budget that they are removed? And as a result, the overall budget will not have been moved at all by this particular line?
No, when I was putting this presentation together last week before I got sick and then was suddenly unable to kind of complete all the numbers and make sure all the numbers were correct. Some of the lines in Munis weren't captured correctly. So it really is just a representation of the
Well,
presentation.
no, I didn't mean that, Jeff. I meant the fact that you actually reorganized. And so now that you're accounting for salaries under the new reorganization, that means you took a salary from one account and put it in this account.
Correct.
Can we assume overall that the sum is the same? It's just the components are weighted differently, if you want to look at it that way.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put that. You'll see that in some of the other budgets. You actually
Okay,
saw
that's
that.
all I want to know, Jeff. That's good.
Yeah, you saw that in part with the facilities budget when it went down. That's because we had a building and grounds superintendent position that was classified down to a facility supervisor.
Yeah.
So there were some overall restructuring that happened that didn't change the headcount, but would have changed, salaries and how people were paid and what people were paid.
Yeah, okay.
So if there's no questions, we can move on to the next one, which should be the other direction. Should be Highway. Highway Fund 422. This was simply just some very small changes in what you saw. In fact, just to make sure the math was correct, again, it was capturing the right numbers off of the Munis printouts in order to do this presentation. But this is an example under wages between FY22 and FY23 where it went down. So again, there is a position that was previously funded out of here, which was the highway superintendent that we did not fill. So any salary associated with that was really the assistant DPW director. So again, there's some personnel grade changes that happen in here, but overall, we didn't fill a position that was listed in this budget in 2022, which was the highway superintendent. As far as the expenses, that's relatively unchanged. There's a very small increase in vehicle maintenance that's reflected in this budget. That's the $10,000 difference. So there is some improvement to that. What we're seeing in vehicle maintenance is that the costs of keeping vehicles longer, which I think overall saves the town money, but the cost of keeping vehicles longer is that we have to spend more on maintenance. And I'd like to see the maintenance budget go up a little bit more, but $10,000 for FY23 is certainly better than nothing. What we have done in previous years, similar to what was done in the other budgets I mentioned before, like trees, the free cash request is what was used to supplement this. So we need something that's closer to $50,000 for repair of vehicles, and an increase of 10 in this budget is certainly a help, but you'll see in a kind of a closing slide in this presentation, we're still looking at a deficit with regards to vehicle maintenance costs generally. That's the overview with regards to highway. I don't know if there's any questions about that.
No questions from me about highway, but just going back to the assistant DPW director position being reinstated, can you just refresh our memory on why that position went away in the first place? Was it just attrition and it didn't get filled? A retirement?
Yeah, basically, Rob Angel was the last assistant DPW director. When George Allaire suddenly passed away,
Yeah.
Rob was promoted to the interim position. He was not formally considered that department head position until they, opened that and posted it, and I applied for it and was appointed by the Board of Selectmen. So that's kind of what happened when I was brought on board. The assistant position went away. It's something that we've certainly been looking to formalize again, and it took some time and some reorganizations in order to make that happen, but we're there now. What I will say about staffing in the DPW generally, and you probably have heard from a lot of departments that have come through about, oh yeah, in 2008, 2009, 2010 timeframe, there was a 20% reduction in staffing within the town as a whole, and DPW certainly represented that full 20% across all the divisions. But even in the meantime, and I don't think there's any other departments that can say this, but even in the meantime, we've had several other positions cut, even in recent years. So the assistant DPW director is an example of one. And even in my relatively short time frame here, we've had two other DPW positions that were cut as well. So there's been a regular program of reductions in positions, usually related to attrition or people leaving and then just not filling positions.
Okay, thank you, Jeff.
The next budget is snow and ice. Definitely on a timely discussion for this particular item. You can see from FY21 what we spent. So we did pretty well with the funds we were given last year, and it was a relatively mild year, but we still did go over the $197,000 budget. Not proposing any changes this year because, as the committee is well aware, this is the one budget within municipal operations that we can legally overspend if we need to. And you can't predict the weather. So some years we get pretty close to that budget of 197,000, and in other years we'll completely blow that. We've already had some discussions even as recently as today with the finance director about how we might deal with any issues if we do happen to go over. And the way we've been dealing with that in the past is that article number 1 in town meeting, dealing with any deficits that might happen with regard to snow and ice. And so we are planning that could be a potential this year. And so we're thinking about that. But this is definitely one that's just very difficult to predict because it's totally related to how many storms we have and how often we plow and treat the roads.
Jeff, would you say though, over say the last 10 years that the number of storms and times that you have to plow has pretty steadily gone down?
I think it's been pretty consistent with the number of times. I will say that over the last 10 years or so, I think the intensity of storms has increased. The types of storms have definitely changed. We've had some tornadoes. We've had some other pretty significant, environmental events. The amount of snow, certainly over the last 10 years, there's a couple of really big snowstorms in there. So I would say the intensity and duration of storms seems to be increasing. The number, maybe is very similar. I don't think it's changed a whole lot.
And then another question, with gas prices being up, is that kind of factored in here in terms of whatever you have to pay contractors?
I would say it's not factored in the budget because we're keeping that flat. But I will say that working with town administration, we did increase the rates we pay contractors this past year because of the increases in costs with regards to insurance and fuel. That is something we hadn't raised in several years, and we want to be competitive so we don't lose contractors. We are currently short a few contractors. About 5 of our plow routes are uncovered, and so we'd like to have a few more. And so we wanted to stay competitive and not losing too many contractors. We did increase our rates to what I would consider comparable with what Barnstable and Dennis are charging.
Thanks, Joe.
So the next budget is sanitation, and this is a budget that is, again, can be difficult to predict because of the volumes associated with C&D or even solid waste in a time where there's more people staying home. Recycling markets are, very fickle, and so it's difficult to determine how much we're going to pay and what we get paid for in some of these regards. So this is something that we've looked at. I did have a discussion, like I said, as recently as today with the finance director about things we might be short on. And I do suspect that C&D is something we're going to be short on in this FY22 budget year, but we can deal with that in that Article 1 at town meeting. And so I suspect that we'll probably see something in that regard if the trends continue as they are with C&D. But with that said, there is some adjustment in this particular budget between FY22 and 23. Salaries went down. So you saw that the DPW admin wages went up, but that's because some of these others went down with regards to where we're paying people out of. Roby again came out of this budget and is now in the DPW admin budget. So that's explains the decrease in wages there. As far as expenses, there is not a significant increase in expenses, again, just probably in part because the difficulty of predicting the volumes associated with this. And Roby, I don't know if you want to add anything with this budget discussion.
No, Jeff, I think you did a great job. I think that it's really important to note that recycling is definitely getting more and more challenging. The cost of C&D is going up, and anticipated a new contract coming in next year and with a potential increase. The price of tires, the cost of recycling tires has gone through the roof. The same can be said about a new rule with the DEP for mattress recycling. A lot of these costs are really outside of our control, and we're monitoring them and being cautiously aware.
Are we raising the fees to dispose these items accordingly?
As a matter of fact, I submitted a memo to the town administrator's office seeking permission to have a fee hearing for the C&D and mattresses and coming up soon. And I'm sure that that'll be considered in the coming months with the Board of Selectmen for a fee hearing.
And I have a related question. As you raise the rates to dispose, how many people decide that they're going to evade this tax and just dump it on Forest Street, for example, before they get there?
I think that most of the contractors that come to the disposal area have a good plan in place for their loads, and they look at the town of Yarmouth C&D area as an excellent option, not only for their speed of getting in and out of the facility, but also for the great price that is currently being offered. I think that as far as what gets disposed of on the roadside, we look to the police department to assist us with monitoring that and being aware of that.
No, my only concern is, that, certainly it's one thing to raise the fee to dispose, but what that does is incent people to discard in places that we don't want them to discard. I don't know whether we have any evidence of that, but I just worry about that.
Well, it's definitely a concern, and I think it's something that all communities struggle with when they talk about fees and wanting to make it palatable for people. I will say that although we do have some illegal dumping, it's not what I would consider a major issue compared to what I've witnessed in other communities. So I think we're at a good place. You're right, we don't want to raise the fees too high or too quickly, but we haven't raised the C&D fee since 2017. And so its costs are going up. And so now is the time to do so. So we'll see how that goes. It's also difficult time, in the for people economically to deal with talking about raising fees, but we do want to make sure, to your point earlier, that we're covering all our costs. Well, if there's no other questions on sanitation, we can move to the next. The next budget is Septage. This is an enterprise fund. It's 440, fund number 440. These are the costs associated with that. There had been a history in the past of having some wages paid out of this budget as well. As you can see, that's not the trend. That wasn't the case in 2021, nor is it what we're proposing now. Again, we're looking to fund salaries in the budgets that they're primarily supporting. So not looking to put portions of people's salaries in Septage as we've done in the past. As far as expenses, we are proposing to go up slightly on the expenses to cover some of the increases in insurances and the sludge disposal costs. I know there was a question about some of those sludge disposal costs that was raised in an email. So just to cover that real briefly, that's the residuals that are related to the processing. Currently, we dispose of our sludge after we dewater it as much as we can in a tractor trailer, and it gets hauled all the way to upstate New York, Seneca Falls landfill. And so the cost of doing that is, as you can imagine, very expensive to send tractor trailer loads that far. So we are, as a town staff, and looking at different options. We do go out to bid for that, which is why we feel we've got a competitive price for it. But we are looking at options related to anaerobic digestion and other options for the facility up there to try to continue to reduce costs because they're only going up. And it's something that's very difficult to control. There's very limited options with regards to where you can dispose of that. Massachusetts does not allow disposal of that. We had gone to Maine and New Hampshire in the past, and now we are dealing with that in upstate New York. Just as an aside, the reason we can't go to Maine and New Hampshire anymore is because of the PFAS components associated with this. So it is something that is a concern generally, and we're just looking to the future for better ways to deal with that product. It's definitely a cost concern for us.
Jeff, I have a question, just trying to understand the revenue component of the fee haulers. Did you say that was an enterprise account?
It is. It covers its costs and it's an enterprise, yes. Okay.
So just to clarify then, so are the fees that you get, the 2.5 and change million, those are just like the fees that you get, and then you're increasing that as needed to kind of cover the overall cost on septage in your cost side of your budget? I ask because I'm just confused because it's gone up and down the past couple of years. Like it was at 2.7 at one point, and then 2.5, and now 2.53. And so I guess I'm just wondering, like, is the actual revenue fluctuating that much? Or did you bring it down like in FY22 and then bring it back up to meet the expenses in FY23?
Yeah, it is a balance, so that the revenues do fluctuate that significantly. Part of that's based upon collections, part of that's based upon how often haulers come to our facility. They do also have choices to bring the septage off Cape, so it is a very a market that does change quite a bit. So it does fluctuate. It's not as steady of a revenue source as you would expect. That's why it's one of the reasons it's difficult to predict what the expenses are as well. But because it's an enterprise fund, we do each year look to match the projected revenues with the expenses.
So it's not the type of thing where you could get a little bit more in and hold on to that into the enterprise so that you could have more predictability in a year where you might have less revenues and more expenses or steady level expenses.
Right. Well, we do have retained earnings, and for this particular fund, it's probably in the $4 million range. And so if we miss some of our revenue forecasts and we need to dip into those retained earnings, that's certainly possible. So there is a cushion built in with retained earnings, if that answers your question.
Yeah, I guess that's a little bit of what I was trying to get a handle around without having the language for it exactly. That are you actually collecting 2.5 million, or are you collecting 3 million and $500,000 of it stays as retained earnings?
Anything above what we expend stays as retained earnings. And typically we've been closer to the $3 million for what we've collected. But over the last year, it's been down slightly for whatever reasons. But we do have that retained earnings that serves as a buffer for us. It's pretty healthy in this particular case.
Question. When we get the wastewater plant up and running here in Yarmouth, can some of this material be processed through there so it doesn't have to be trucked off Cape?
No, that's a good question, but the sludge is a residual from not only a septage treatment plant, but will also be the case in a wastewater plant. And that residual needs to go somewhere. So that's one of the reasons we're looking at anaerobic digestion at that facility to deal with wastewater sludges in addition to what was generated by the septage facility. But ultimately, it'll have to go somewhere. It's a product that can't be further processed.
Thank you.
I have a general question, and then I don't think, Jeff, this is for you to answer. Maybe Bob or Bill can answer it, but in the presentation of the budget, we're just getting income statement information. And when we're talking about these, I forget what you call them, but these side funds, shouldn't we see a balance sheet at the same time?
There's a balance sheet that's available from finance. So yes, that information is out there.
I mean,
Absolutely.
I'm sure it is, but I'm just suggesting that, it'd be more informative to us if we understood what the, net revenues were, or I forget what the term is for on fund accounting, but I'm not an accountant. But assets minus liabilities. Do we get to, if we got to see that, it makes this more meaningful, especially as Jeff just described it. I guess we're told those are the expenses, but we don't really know what the revenues are. They may be more. And it would be kind of nice to understand where the retained earnings are going, or if there are any, and what's the cushion we've got to rely on.
Yeah.
I'm just saying it's.
Every year we prepare a detailed fund analysis that's certified by the Department of Revenue that includes all of the revenues, expenses, what the fund balance is. So that information is readily available on an annual basis. And I think would be very helpful for the Finance Committee to take a look at it.
Okay, I'm just suggesting it be provided. That's all. Bob.
I think what I hear George saying, and I would echo this sentiment when it comes to a number of things related to finance, that for the Finance Committee being all volunteers, having to go hunt and peck for different types of reports and compare, something from a, end of fiscal year of last year with, what's proposed for this year, as opposed to like projections, and not having it sort of all consolidated in one book that we can look at, is, it's asking a lot of volunteers. So to whatever extent that the finance department or various departments as they're, helping you all in future years putting together the budget books, I think that it would be helpful to know not only what's happening with enterprise funds, but, if there are other funds that departments have access to that are, managed by, Friends of the Senior Center or, other kind of nonprofit type things. It would help the finance committee to have a bigger picture of what the different resources are, and help streamline things for us, as it is currently stands, quite a lot to go through for again volunteers.
All right, well, if there's no other questions on septage, we can move to the next one.
Before you move along, I would just say that especially when it comes to the enterprise funds, one of the things that, we try not to do is put piles and piles of paper in front of you, but I personally have found very instructive. And when I sat with Jeff, it was valuable to me to look at the schedule that is on page 7-17 of your budget presentation. And that is the information that links the for the septage department, the expenditure forecasts, actuals for the past 2 years, but it also links up the revenue collections for those periods as well. So I think it's a good jumping off point for time when you look at the enterprise funds. One of the things that you want to think of is tying the revenues with the expenditures. And so that at least is a start if you're looking at one place, sort of one-stop shopping. And I guess what I'm suggesting that there is other detailed independent reports, the tax-free capitulation sheet, the town's annual independent audit. But I think in the budget document, there's also a pretty good breakdown of revenues versus expenditures for the enterprise fund. So maybe take a peek at that to start.
Yeah, and I agree. It is a good starting place, and that's where my question originated from. But the fact that we had to do that level of digging and asking those questions to understand what's happening with any kind of retained earnings is just, if we could ameliorate having to have that conversation, moving forward. And even if it's just as an addendum, at the back of the section of each department, just to, with kind of a disclaimer of like that enterprise doesn't mean we can touch it for any other purpose, et cetera, et cetera. But this is just, what our retained earnings balance sheet is. I think that would suffice.
Well, Bob, for example, I'm looking at that, and so I'm getting down to the line that says total septic expenditures. And that looks like if I'm not mistaken, the 2.533996. And then I look at revenues and it's 2.53899. So can I assume that $100 difference is the difference? And that's what's your forecasting is going into the term I was groping for before, net assets. And so that's the amount that's transferred into the fund.
That is just how they calculated the budget for the previous year or the upcoming year. So the whole
I don't see anything that helps me understand what's in the the balance sheet. I can understand the income statement and once I get through all the jargon crap, but I just trying to understand. Are we generating more revenues than we're expending? And I think I can see we are, but I don't know. What if you missed on your estimate of forecasts? So what are we looking at as a buffer? You know, what's on the balance sheet?
Yeah, that's a different report.
So I'm only I wasn't trying to be critical, Bob. I was just trying to say it would help us better understand. That's all. And to take Stephanie's point, we're just volunteers. None of us are public accountants. I'm just a humble professor. I don't know anything about this crap, but but I want to know, and I don't want to just blow it off and say, oh, okay, whatever,
Yeah, I think it just goes to a larger point that, I tried to illustrate last week when it came to, for example, getting the memo from the police chief as far as, the training facility and kind of, different stages and what can we expect for future stages and, what have the pay for has been, et cetera. Like, it's not because at the end of the day, we're going to recommend against it or, break it down and criticize it. It's more of help us just understand and get a bigger picture of, what else we can kind of be anticipating as, future expenses or, possible sources of revenue, et cetera. It's just a matter of understanding it. But I think we should move on, given the time, and finish up with, what are we on next? Wastewater? That's going to take a while, right?
No, I think these are all pretty straightforward. This is our newest enterprise fund, which is the 443. It is the start of building something as involved as water and septage. This is the first year of it. As you can see, previously we had 0 for expenses. We don't anticipate any wages this year, but there are some expenses associated with water quality testing, professional services, and some additional wastewater planning that would be funded out of this particular fund. And so that's what's being set aside as far as expenses. Because it is an enterprise fund, if we don't expend these funds fully, they just go back to retained earnings, back to the fund itself. So that in essence is what this is. Again, it's the first year. It's just the start of a process for this enterprise fund. Are there any questions about wastewater?
Well, I guess, I'm the one that asked the question to be able to walk us through this. So, for example, Jeff, as you all know, I'm on the wastewater committee, so I've seen all the performers indicating how we're going to fund this and each year, but I'm just trying to tie page 719 to the information I have so I can understand it. For example, there's debt service interest. Are we borrowing this year?
I don't expect that we'll need to borrow this year, but as we set up these enterprise funds, and just like we talked about for septage and we'll talk about for water in a moment, your expenses have to balance against what you have for funds. So there is some amount of debt service that's anticipated. I don't know that we're actually going to need that because we won't be in a point where we're actually constructing anything this year. Right. But it is, the 1.6 is reference to what was put in the enterprise fund when town meeting created the enterprise fund. So it was created and then money was deposited in there. So there are funds available for this expense line. What was shown on that the page that you're referring to is some potential debt service. I don't know that we'll actually need that this year, but we're budgeting for something in case we move forward aggressively enough to need it. But
right,
it's not likely we'll need that amount.
If we do draw down the money, that is, we may issue the bonds, then we're guessing that this would be the interest expense associated with those in this period. Okay, that's all I need.
It would be.
That's all I need.
Yeah, there is an outside chance in FY23 we might need some short-term borrowing, and it would come out of that, but
okay,
not yet fully determined.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
So Jeff, are there, I believe I recall hearing last fall that there might be a warrant article relating to wastewater this spring. Is that happening or not?
We don't need any funding associated with Construction or design, we have the design funds, as I mentioned previously, and construction, we're not anticipating needing that until a year from now, till spring of 23. And so there's no funding request needed relative to wastewater, particularly if this is approved. If this if this enterprise fund expenses are approved, anything that we would need with regards to professional services or ongoing wastewater planning or water quality testing could come out of this expense line. So going back a couple of years, we had a couple of years where $200,000 was approved for wastewater planning efforts. This was before the bigger numbers associated with design. And this is essentially what we're doing out of this enterprise fund now. So there wouldn't be a need for a separate wastewater article. It would be, what you see here in this enterprise fund.
Let me
And
raise another question.
George, just give me a moment to
Oh, I'm
to
sorry.
finish. I want to follow up. So when you mentioned spring, is that the time when DOT would be opening up 28?
The two DOT projects are planned for 2024, I believe, at this point. So
Okay.
we'll have the ability to approve funds well in advance of them doing their work.
Okay, so maybe they move, it sounds like they moved the timing of that a little bit. And then I would say just kind of a follow-up is it would be helpful, I think, for this committee, once we get through the budget, perhaps to circle back with, for those of us who aren't on the Water Resources Advisory Committee, to just hear a little bit more of kind of, all right, this committee obviously very, very much supportive of moving forward with phase one and, the need for investment in wastewater, but I think that it would be good for us to hear at some later date. All right, we've kind of got through last fall town meeting. What's next? What do the next couple of years look like? What are some of the things? How can we be helpful? That type of thing. So I would suggest that we put it on the agenda for a later date to have you back, along with maybe the, Kurt Sears or whomever from the committee, to give us that picture. I think would be really helpful.
Yeah, that would be great.
George, please go ahead.
Jeff, for example, there should be someplace in here, and I'm assuming it's in the lines on the revenues, transfers in from the general fund and special revenue fund. We've got the dedicated WIF that's coming off the property tax. And then the second of all, whatever the dedicated funds that are coming out of the rooms tax, is that what's in the 1.6 million?
The 1.6 million, as I recall, made up a couple of different things. I don't know if Bob remembers exactly all the components of that, but there was some funds that were available for that. And this enterprise fund does give a place for future funds to be deposited, and you're absolutely right.
And George, the 1.6 primarily is the funds that we transferred in from the short-term rental. And it's hoping that, those wind up floating over to the retained earnings. And part of the pre-funding program is to build up the retained earnings. Now, the WIF is established as a separate fund. So those funds don't go directly into the enterprise fund. They would be subsequently transferred to meet the costs when they have those in the future.
Okay.
And just to refresh everyone, the estimate was a little over $500,000 a year would flow through the WIF into that fund.
Right. Thank you.
Just one follow up for you, Bob. We had talked at an earlier meeting about, I think the selectmen had a desire to create a stabilization account for the short-term rental revenues. Where are we with that? Did you all get the link to the language that I'd sent you at one point of a state statute you could adopt as a home rule?
That we haven't really had a lot of discussion about it, I would say, but ultimately we are definitely searching for a structure to put some structure to the future payments under that would save those for wastewater. That was, that's a concern that we have, is that has to be addressed. Because ultimately, once we get into the situation where, we're appropriating funds, we need to have the structured fund that automatically those revenues go into. So I don't have an update for you, but it is still at the top of our list.
So, and I'm thinking back to that conversation. I feel like it was you who said that in particular, because we don't have a structure to automatically do that, that we would have to have some sort of article at town meeting to do that again this year, because we only did it on a one-time basis last year.
That's correct.
So we would have a wastewater article.
It may be in the fall,
Okay. So not this spring.
right?
Okay, thank you.
All right, well, if there's no other wastewater questions, we could move on to water. This budget here is, relatively straightforward from 2022 to 23. Some small adjustments in wages, mostly related to retirement, and we've done some reclassifications of positions, but that goes down slightly as you've got more senior people that leave and you bring on more junior people. And so that's really kind of the reflected change in the wages there. As far as the expenses go, there was some adjustment in what the charges are come from the water to the general fund. And so that's probably the biggest part of that reduction in what the expenses are for FY23. There's also some line item adjustments. Lori, I don't know if you want to touch on this budget quickly. I think they've heard a lot from me. I think they might be happy to hear from you on this one.
I've just been going through trying to kind of simplify the budget a little bit. It used to be broken up into you have the same line item, but in multiple kind of funds. So I've just been trying to consolidate and also look back more closely at what we've done in the past, what we've spent out of each line item, and try and make sure that we're funding the line items correctly, basically. So we were able to take the different items out of from where they belong, rather than trying to figure stuff out at the end of the year and have line items going over and some not. So that's what most of those changes are within my budget. It's just moving stuff around.
Questions for Lori or Jeff on the water department? Okay.
All right, well, moving on, if there's no other questions, the next fund is cemetery. That's Fund 491. There are really no significant changes in this particular fund. There is some small adjustment for wages, which is really related to contractual changes, some seasonal wage adjustments. We're trying to make sure that our seasonal wages keep up with the increase in the minimum wage. And so there's some adjustments with regards to that. This budget only funds one full-time person. The rest of the wages are seasonal. As far as expenses, it's relatively flat as far as the expenses go for this particular budget. Any questions about cemetery? All right, moving on to the next one, and it is our last fund to talk about. This is Park. It's Fund 650. There is some adjustments to the wages, but that's primarily because we're adding seasonal staff at Grays Beach. That was done through a separate mechanism last year, but this year it's being added to the budget. The selectmen voted to move forward with continuing to staff the booth at Grays Beach, and so we'll continue to charge for that going forward. And so we added some seasonal staff, and that's what's reflected in the wage increase. As far as the expenses, that is flat as well in this particular case. That's really all I have for parks.
Jeff, I had a question on that about beach receipts. And so I don't know if it's covered in this particular department, but when we were talking to recreation. They let us know that the beach receipts are actually managed by your department because of just some historical reason. So I'm just curious if beach receipts this year were 655,000 collected, how much are you expending in maintenance of the beaches?
Yeah, we're gonna, in a couple of slides, there'll be some revenues, and that's one that I did need to update. That was not the correct amount of beach receipts. That number needed to be properly reflected and is actually $877,000 just to, that's how much we've taken in. So what's reflected as far as park maintenance is the wages and expenses associated with that, but we do take in more beach receipts than we have in park staff. But again, there's other cost centers associated with beaches. The lifeguards are not part of this. And of course, recreation is a separate budget, which I think you might have already reviewed. So there are other expenses associated with beaches. What's primarily in parks that DPW is the maintenance of the beaches. We have 6 full-time staff members in parks and another 6 seasonal that deal with cleaning of the restrooms, as well as some maintenance and mowing of parks. It also includes 11 beach gate attendants, and then 2 additional attendants are being added this year for seasonally for Grays Beach. So those are what the wages and staffing looks like for parks. And those are the expenses associated with that.
And is that fund, does that go back into the general fund, or is that its own enterprise account?
It's a general fund account.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I know it's hard when you have people who are doing other services as well. It would be nice to get a little bit more of a picture of, you know, kind of what we're getting in total. How much are we expending across different departments? And maybe that's something that Bob and Bill can help out with.
It's a good question. It's across departments, so I don't know that I have a great answer for that. That's parks. If there's no other questions, we can go to the next slide. And these are really just the summary slides. Challenges facing public works. So we have significant water and wastewater projects in the future. We've talked a little bit about that, but those are going to, require significant resources, manpower, and funds to accomplish those. We also touched upon the limited options and increasing costs associated with the wastewater sludge. Right now, it's specifically hitting us related to the Septage facility, but that's certainly going to be an impact as we go into wastewater treatment as well. They have a product from that needs to be dealt with as well. It's a challenge across the Cape and across the Commonwealth. It's not just a Yarmouth challenge. Increasing vehicle maintenance costs, as we talked about, there is some adjustment in the budget that I just covered for that, but not enough to cover all of our costs. And of course, increasing facility maintenance costs. There is some adjustment that was done in the facilities maintenance budget, but not enough to cover all of the costs. And so many of the facilities maintenance costs have been funded out of the capital budget. We have an HVAC article with capital, and I think they've looked favorably upon that. But that's how we've dealt with the additional facilities maintenance costs in the past. Moving forward to the next slide, recommendations to address some future challenges. Certainly, I think looking at a sanitation enterprise fund would be helpful in tracking that particular cost center. There's several enterprise funds we covered today, but sanitation was not one of those. Sanitation generally covers all of its expenses, and so I think it would be a good way to show that and capture that in an enterprise fund. Of course, the increasing vehicle maintenance budget and centralizing that. We touched upon that already. We just got ahead of ourselves, and here it's, see it on this slide here. And then of course, the facilities maintenance budget, whether it's actual maintenance of equipment or buildings or equipment in buildings or custodial services, but that's all an increasing cost that I think we need to consider in the future. And putting that back within the operating budget of facilities would make sense too, rather than making capital requests for HVAC and things like of that nature would certainly make sense. So those are some of the recommendations that we have. And the next slide relates to free cash requests. This is just kind of captures all of those things that I mentioned before that might not have had sufficient funding within the operating budget. This is something we'll continue to keep track of so that we make sure that we have sufficient funds for equipment maintenance and tree maintenance. Also, Sandy Pond tennis courts were not reflected in any of these budgets or capital requests, but is certainly in need of some work over there. About $20,000 in court maintenance costs are needed. Wastewater planning, I put if needed on here. That's a list of the different things that go into that wastewater planning. But if the enterprise fund for wastewater is approved as we talked through here, that wastewater planning funds would come out of that expense item. So that might not be necessary if the enterprise fund for wastewater expenses are approved. And the next slide, I think this is going to be our last slide. I like to end on good news, and that is what the actual revenues were for 2021. If you add these up, I think you're getting to a number that's approaching $14 million, and our budgets that I just covered were about $13.5 million. So I know there was some questions about generating revenue and covering costs, but I think we do a pretty good job of that in Public Works. We can always do better, and we do cover quite a bit of our costs, and this slide shows that. So happy to answer any questions you might have.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. This is a great presentation, and I agree. You definitely already do a great job when it comes to revenue generation. I'm asking this of every department head because I'm looking 5, 10, 15 years out and seeing that towns across the Cape are going to struggle to attract and retain workers much more than they already are. And if we can position ourselves to offer certain services that we're particularly good at or have the capacity for to other towns and make a little extra money off of it to go towards other needs in our budget, that we should be thinking about that now. So it's something that we'll probably ask you next year too. And it's just something that we'd like you to just be thinking about. If there was a certain, if we did some kind of capital investment or some sort of budgetary investment in a particular division, is there something that you all do really good that you could then sort of capture a market share and maybe position yourself for? And it's okay if you don't have an answer now, but it's something that we, to think about for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I have thought a little bit about this. I think we do really, really good job in water, and we're positioning ourselves to do a really, really good job in wastewater. And so I think those are two opportunities for us. We have seen that opportunity in water. We've just recently stopped water sales to Barnstable, but we were helping them out with a significant challenge they had by providing water and therefore revenue to the town of Yarmouth. And I think wastewater provides a similar opportunity if we have a facility up and running, which is a few years down the road, but there's no reason why we couldn't provide treatment services to dentists. I think they're a little further behind us in wastewater planning, to be honest with you. And we do know that the town of Barnstable is looking for effluent recharge capacity, and we have the ability to do that here at Buck Island Road or Bass River Golf Course. And so I think there's some good opportunities with regard to wastewater. A little bit down the road, but those would be my answers to that question.
Thank you. Other questions for Jeff?
Yeah, Jeff, it's George. I have 3 questions actually that just arose out of comments you made. And by the way, I want to reaffirm what Stephanie said. This is one of the best presentations we've had in the sense of detail, and you get a large department to deal with. So I very much appreciate what the information we were given and your presentation here. At one point, you made the comment that since 2008, you've lost staff. And you even suggested that more than other departments. But I want to look at this in terms of a forced reorganization. So do you think because of the reorganization you've been forced to do, has the town benefited or has it been harmed in terms of the delivery of services that have resulted?
Well, I want to start out by answering the question to say that we're committed to doing the best job that we can with the resources that we're given, both financial and
Jeff, thanks for the
personal.
corporate bullshit, but come on.
And with that said, part of that is building kind of the best team you can. And I think we have had a great team. You've met many of them here tonight.
Oh,
And we try to maximize the use of people's strengths with some of this reorganization, but you're absolutely right. We did it out of necessity because, we had less people. And so you have to do things differently and think about it differently and how you're going to approach it differently. So we've had to do that. Are we better off? I don't know. I think there's definitely some service deficiencies out there that we need to do a better job at. And by reorganizing, we tried to position ourselves to improve the best we can. But I would just say we just did it out of necessity. And I think it's a good move, and we'll continue to look at improvements as we go forward. And that's the best we can do.
Right. So I haven't heard you allude to any harm. So I'll take it as reorganization was at worst neutral and maybe beneficial. Okay, second
Sure.
question. We talked a little bit about, concentrating services in one place. Vehicle maintenance was the example I think we focused on most. But one that comes to mind and this may reflect how little I know about how the town operates, but are our information services coming out of one shop, or does each department essentially deal with its own? I mean, does the library deal with its computer services? Does your department just deal with it? Does finance do an awful lot of it? Or I guess the implied question here is, would we benefit by consolidating it into one department?
Well, our IT department in town handles quite a bit of the town's needs. But with that said, there's still needs within each department to either pay for, software or consultants. I know water, pays for a fair share of what their needs are. So I think continuing to consolidate makes sense on a lot of fronts. And I think in recent years, over the last 10 or 15 years, Yarmouth has consolidated somewhat of its IT services within our IT department.
Okay, I'm going to take that as things are working pretty good, and there probably isn't any significant improvements that can be made by consolidation right now. We're basically consolidated. Fair assessment?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Finally, the sludge. What does Seneca Falls do with it?
It's a landfill. They just bury it.
Okay. The reason why I'm asking, and again, indicating my ignorance here, but Milwaukee makes fertilizer out of it, Milorganite. Is there any market for that? Or has Milwaukee taken it?
Well, the anaerobic I talked about earlier about an anaerobic digester, and that's essentially what that is. It creates, processes that sludge and generates electricity or gas out of it. So there's a utility.
Okay, all right. The process generates.
But a byproduct of that is
okay.
a fertilizer, a compost.
Okay, I understand. Remember, I told you I was ignorant, really, of it. All right, I'm done. Thank you very much.
Questions from other committee members? While George was asking this question, I was trying to dig up my copy of the capital budget presentation, and I can't find it. But do you have items on the capital budget, or do you have any other warrant articles that we should be aware of?
We have a lot of items on the capital budget. I don't have
There's some
those
trucks
slides
and
or that
stuff, right?
information in front of me. But we do have a lot of items in the capital, some that were funded, some that weren't.
There we go.
DPW
Thank you,
typically
Bill.
has a lot of items generally, just because of the various departments we have in different functions.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Bill, for pulling that up. Does anyone have any questions for Jeff as it relates to the capital expenditures? And Bill, remind us, the proposed budget would go down to the yellow line. You're on mute, Bill.
The blue line represents if you do no changes in how you handle the projects above the line. So the yellow line represents if you lease cruisers and do other moves as it indicates in the narratives, you can get down to the yellow line. So it's sort of reallocating how you pay for some of the things, moves you from the blue to the yellow line. And the column that is the second one over indicates DPW versus senior center, police, and things like that.
So committee members, any questions on these items? Okay. And Jeff, no other warrant articles, right? Aside from capital?
What Bill was just showing was the routine capital or the general capital. We also have some water capital that's on there as well, but you know, that would be the other requests.
The water capital, but is contained in that report, the CIP, right?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's shown right here on this one, the funds that are enterprise funds, et cetera. So this is the water right in this area.
And this was something, Jeff, that I seem to recall you saying, basically, we've got to replace a bunch of these wellheads and we're going to just spread it out over several years and do kind of the same amount each year. Is that right?
That well redevelopment is exactly what you're referring to. That's a proactive kind of operations maintenance O&M type of thing where we redevelop 4 to 5 wells each year and then rotate those through our network of wells to make sure that they're functioning properly. I'm sure Lori could explain that a lot better than I just did, but that's essentially what that piece is.
It's just helpful for us to know to expect that in future years. Not be surprised by it. That's all.
And what Jeff was talking about should show up here in terms of going, well, it's not in detail, it's in another spreadsheet. So
yeah, so in addition to just that well redevelopment program, there's also going to be quite a bit of water main replacement going forward. You saw one on that chart just a moment ago, but we've also got Route 28 and some other areas where sewers are planned. We're also looking to address water infrastructure at the same time. It makes sense, but that's costly as well.
Definitely makes sense. The last question that I just have is, you reminded me of that just now, is you had said in the free cash request that the Sandy Pond Court maintenance wasn't included in your overall budget. And of course, I don't always remember what we did 6 months ago or a year ago, but and this is maybe just a broader question for Bob and Bill, but do we regularly get what the O&M costs are going to be when we get capital requests?
For the major projects, that the operation and maintenance, you should definitely be a part of that. I think with the Sandy Pond issue, it's a little bit different based on the age of the facilities. I think what you're dealing with are, some old facilities that have some pent up maintenance. And the idea is, they're slated for removal and replacement at some point in the future, but can we invest to get a little more life out of them so that we don't have to speed up the larger project to completely replace them? And I think that that's what Jeff brings up, is some possibilities of going in there and doing some, maintenance that just is sort of to keep them rolling, you know? I don't know, Jeff, how old are those courts? Do you have any idea?
Those courts are original for when they developed Sandy Pond. I don't know exactly what the date on that is. There is, as Bob, as you mentioned, there is a bigger project down the road to kind of redo the whole park, but there's some general court maintenance that's needed. And I think the finance committee's brought some of this up in the past and we funded some of it. But the problem with the budgets as tight as they are, we don't have money within the operating budget to do proper court maintenance, whether it's to repair some basketball courts, or in this particular one, I mentioned some tennis courts. So we really have to find a way kind of outside of the operating budget to fund that. So that's kind of why it was on the list. It's something also that came up after the capital budget was submitted. So it's not something that, you know, we could add at that time. You know, these budgets are, you know, put together at, you know, almost a year before we actually need to use them. And so, you know, things are ever changing. And so I'm just trying to have a place to capture things to make sure we don't, you know, miss pieces, or we definitely want to, you know, things we want to fund that we have to figure out a way to fund.
So, thank you. That's helpful. I think though, I guess my question would just be, of the items that you are requesting out of the capital budget, will you generally have the ability to fund the operation maintenance of most of those within your operating budget next year or this coming year, if you get those?
The short answer is yes. I mean, there's a couple of vehicles, and water has 3, I believe, in what Bill was just showing. And then we have a couple in the other part of the capital budget. And those are replacing older pieces of vehicles in the fleet that are really becoming very expensive to maintain because of all the repairs they need. So there's definitely room within the budget to continue to maintain those, and especially when they're a little more fuel efficient and less maintenance costs, that certainly helps.
Okay. And I think this is maybe less of a concern for your department, but I feel like we have heard kind of recently some, oh, we didn't think about this, or we didn't realize this, you know, when it came to some capital expenditures and what the ongoing cost would be related to them. And I just think, again, kind of moving forward, it would be helpful to really have some hard numbers, you know, estimates on paper, as opposed to kind of more generic figure, you know, there's going to be some cost or something like that, that we hear from departments. Anyone have anything else for Jeff or his team? Thank you all for standing by. All right, Jeff, thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you for having us.
At this point, I'll take a motion to recommend the DPW budget as presented in tonight's presentation.
I'll make the motion.
I'll
I'll
second.
second. Okay, Nate,
Nate seconded it. Okay. All those in favor, George,
Aye.
Robert,
aye.
Nate,
Aye.
Jack?
Aye.
I'm an aye as well. Okay, terrific. Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Jeff and team. Old business. Do we have any old business items that anyone wants to bring up? Okay. New business. So I have one new business item that I just want to bring up. For folks who haven't seen the Cape Cod Times today, there was a story about the long-suffering fire training academy potentially being relocated to behind the West Yarmouth Fire Station, and potentially some revenues coming in associated with that. You know, Bill and Bob and I emailed earlier, and potentially there's an opportunity to discuss that in greater detail during the contingency meeting that we have scheduled for, what is it, the 22nd, Bill?
We have a meeting on the 9th and then the 16th.
Okay.
So our contingency meeting is on the 9th, depending upon where the school wants to come in, or the 16th.
Okay. So I think it would be helpful for the committee to learn a little bit about this. And I guess my just high level question, before putting that on the agenda for one of those upcoming meetings is just where does generally, from a process perspective, the finance committee get weaved in when it comes to things like this that aren't part of the budget, that it isn't part of capital per se, but it does have a dollar figure related to it?
That this project it's a very interesting project because the way it's designed, and it would be great to get the finance committee. I think that would have been a great step for the fire department to maybe come in and make a presentation. The process that we currently have doesn't really provide for it well, because the way they designed it, it's not supposed to have any financial impact on the town. It's one of those supposed to cover its cost thing. And the most important thing I think to point out is that, everyone knows about all of the problems with the fire training academy out there. And this in no way, shape or form deals with moving that to the town of Yarmouth or anything close to that. Essentially, what that project involves is the county working with, which was originally the town of Provincetown, had applied for a grant from FEMA, sort of in light of the fact that the entire fire academy, which was kind of a big facility, they did a lot of things up there where there was a lot of different training types of endeavors. That closed down for environmental reasons, and it left an enormous hole on Cape Cod for fire training. And so the whole issue had to be rethought. And one small portion of that came in the form of the grant application that the county did. And they were successful. They received a grant, and it was, I think, close to $750,000. And they had to put up a little less than $100,000 for their match. So, say there's $750,000 in this grant to develop a training prop, which is just one specific piece of equipment that was originally slated to be located in Provincetown, which doesn't sound like a really great location to serve Cape Cod. It sounds like a great location to serve the Lower Cape. But at any rate, what happened was they had problems with the site that they had selected. Wasn't feasible for the location of this. And then they looked at another site in Harwich. And throughout this time, I think the chief in Yarmouth had indicated through the Cape Cod Association of Fire Chiefs that, look potentially at a more central Cape Cod location, which would be Yarmouth, for the location of this prop facility to service the area. So when the discussions with Harwich proved unfruitful, they turned to Yarmouth, and Chief Simonian worked with the county to evaluate the parcel of land next to Station 3, I believe it is, and they determined that it was feasible. And then we brought it into the Board of Selectmen and started analyzing the potential of it. So it wouldn't move the fire academy, but by creating a professional fire training prop, which is basically, looks like a building structure. It's located on a slab, and inside the building structure, it has sort of propane gas jets that it's a non-burnable surfaces. And so essentially how it works is that, you turn on the propane, the fire, comes out through the building, and then the different fire company would train by attempting to extinguish the fire using water. And so it's just an entire water-based system, and so that it's environmentally safe, and it fills a hole for training. Now, the county came forward with, if they've got the 100% the grant, the match, and they promised to the all of the towns on Cape Cod to provide a complete turnkey operation that would be 100% funded. And then it would be operated by intermunicipal agreements with the individual fire departments throughout the Cape that would pay for the operation and maintenance of it. So from the Finance Committee standpoint, without the need for any financing, I guess the fire department didn't have occasion to make a presentation, but to my feeling, I think that, it would be something that I would definitely favor the Finance Committee looking at. And we had a number of readings in front of the Board of Selectmen, and the issues they covered in quite some extensive detail to make sure that there was agreement among all of the towns on Cape Cod that they would provide enough funds to operate and maintain that facility. And they've all provided affidavits where they've signed on indicating that they would provide the funding. We were unable, because of the way the finance laws work, to get them, to sign that. Well, we agreed for 10 years that we're going to fund it, but they all agreed to put forth the funds to fund its operations. So what we have now is we're working on a final intermunicipal agreement between the county and the town that provides for issues such as, complete indemnification of all costs from the town, a total turnkey system. If the county is unable to, with the grant that they've received, completely finish the project, they're responsible for the additional funds and not the town. So in a nutshell, that's sort of a description of how the facility is set to work. If it's successful, it will provide a tremendous need for Cape Cod, because there are no fire training. Now that there is no academy, there's no fire training opportunities that exist on the Cape. So in a small way, this would at least provide for some modicum of fire training, which is a problem for Cape Cod departments because there's not enough fires to get the level of expertise that you need in the event that there is a fire. All of these departments are really evolving so closely towards the emergency medical services that they don't get an opportunity to build the skills that they need so that they know what to do on a fire ground. So there's a tremendous value, I think, to the town to have a facility like that located nearby, and to have it located in the town is a tremendous opportunity. If all of the financial issues associated and all of the environmental issues associated with it are completely handled. So I don't know, I guess that's kind of it in a nutshell. And I'm sure the chief could do it a lot more justice in terms of describing the inner workings of the facility. But I did assist him in evaluating the financial aspects of it. And there's not a tremendous amount of cost for operations and maintenance of the facility. But I want to say, it was kind of with the comments that you made, when the Board of Selectmen reviewed it, that was their primary focus. That yes, it's great that there's a $750,000 grant that accrues to the town of Yarmouth to get that facility. But the bigger issue for the Selectmen was not having that asset. It was the operations and maintenance ongoing. And they wanted to absolutely ensure that all of the individual towns signed on to pay those costs. And so we've got, some detailed information that the individual towns and the individual fire departments are going to pay for all of the maintenance. They're going to pay for the operational costs, and they're also going to pay for any out-of-pocket that we have in scheduling the facility. So it's designed not to be a drain on Yarmouth, but to be an asset for Yarmouth. But I'd love to have the finance.
Thank you for filling in the gaps there, Bob. I really appreciate that. I would say, kind of moving forward, that particularly when we're, meeting with department heads, if there are projects like this in the works. Again, not because there's necessarily going to be opposition to something like this, but because it behooves us, in our roles as the finance committee, as the, representatives of town meeting taxpayers and voters, to be aware of this. In addition to the Board of Selectmen, it's great that they're asking these questions, but we need to ask them too. And I'm glad that a lot of these questions and concerns that I might have are being addressed. And if the conversation is as short as that explanation and these concerns are being addressed, then we can kind of move on, after we've had that conversation. But I think making sure that we are brought into that conversation is important. In particular, I do have concerns about, and I'm glad there's going to be an intermunicipal agreement, but, we saw what happened with, police training academy paying for itself at the county level. And then they're having a massive, county, mid-year request because it didn't materialize. And then, also, I guess it would be interesting to know, potentially in this future meeting, what the actual benefit to the town is. If we're not generating any revenue off of it, the only benefit that I can see is that, our firefighters only have to drive from one side of Yarmouth to another, as opposed to driving to Dennis or Harwich or wherever else. So, again, as we've been having conversations about potential revenue generators, and I think it is good for us to think of ourselves as one community, one Cape Cod, but to a certain extent, when a lot of these different facilities end up getting located in Yarmouth and we don't really get any benefit from other towns contributing to, it being there, we do kind of have to take a look at that, especially as we look at, increasing budgets and whatnot. Do other committee members have any questions?
I just think it's a principle thing, Bob. This is an off-balance sheet item, if you will, but so is in golf, so is in water. So these are no different, if you will, at least conceptually, than any of the enterprise funds. And given that we had specifically asked questions about revenue generation, I guess I do recall being told that there was a lot of interaction going on between each of the towns, and some do things for one and the other and all of that. But I think that was an opportunity to make it clear that this is something we're going to do, and not because we have any intention of being NIMBY or any intention of being glomming onto it. If they don't think it's a source of revenue generation, fine, say so. But to trust that the town has been financially protected by this, I think we have a reason to want to know about that. That's all. It may be fully funded. Everybody else may have indemnified us. However, it is in Yarmouth, and there is some implied, if not actual, dollar expenditures by Yarmouth, and we should be at least aware and not reading it in the newspaper.
I want to just tell you, I agree wholeheartedly with you. And, it's a fabulously unique project. And that was probably a very strongly missed step, is to involve in the finance committee. And quite frankly, I think the finance committee could have been involved in the discussions with the selectmen and helped them, between all of us, we could have asked better, tougher, harder questions. But I do look forward to getting the chief in and talking about it in some detail. And I do think that we're still at a point in the process that, that there may be additional flexibility to adjust the operations of the facility, based on any recommendations. I mean, I'm happy to see when you compare it to the old fire academy or the police academy, the operation and maintenance on this is between 10 and 15,000 a year. So it's not a big amount, And,
Right.
and the other thing I just, want to make sure people understand when the chief gets in here that we had a lot of pressure because the town receives the benefit of the $750,000 facility that we get kind of the first access to. There's a lot of pressure on what we charge the other fire departments that we're not allowed to make a big profit on it, but we absolutely need to ensure that all of our costs are covered. So I agree. We probably could have came in when this was first put forward by the department, but I certainly would look forward to the finance committee understanding every aspect of it and making sure we cross every T and dot every I. So I don't think that the oversight in any way, was intended to bypass the finance committee. I just think maybe the project was a little unique and, we didn't think to bring it here.
Okay.
Other comments from committee members or questions?
Stephanie,
Yes.
I just have a question that I hope they've covered the question of liability and insurance on this project because they're going to be playing with fire.
Literally.
That was a nice one, Jack. Yeah, that's a great question as well, for when the chief returns for us, unless you know off the top of your head, Bob.
Yes, there is insurance and then indemnification, and those are all costs we're putting into the operation and maintenance. And each town has to sign. There's like some detailed agreements on how you use it, what you sign off on, the liability, all of it.
I guess that raises an obvious question in my mind. Is there insurance in place, or do we have a willingness to indemnify from each town, which would then be subject to that town's approving whether or not they'd raise the funds to indemnify? Could we be left holding the bag? You don't have to answer that now, but that, those are the kinds of questions I think we might want to have answered.
Right, and the answer is both. There is.
Okay, good.
There will be hard insurance in place, and then there will be also the indemnification of the user parties.
Okay.
So we don't want to have it. There's a subrogation issue. We don't want to have it all on the town's insurance, but we will completely insure the facility. And then the town also maintains, the liability, but the liability is signed off by the user as well. And so we've had town council working on just making sure that we've got sort of a belt and suspenders that, it's something. What if somebody falls down out there? That can happen.
Okay, all right.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Bob, and appreciate too, if, whatever steps can be taken just as far as future projects, making sure that the finance committee is looped in. I think, even predating, you coming in for years, I think there's been a certain sensitivity coming from the finance committee about reading about something in the paper that we should have been known about ahead of time. And so, to whatever extent we can put some good processes in place, I think that would help ameliorate that problem from arising again.
Well, just let me give you my commitment, to work on that together. And Bill and I traditionally, to have a project like this that doesn't even go through the CIP, that doesn't go through anything, it's a little bit strange, but it's instructive. And I just, want to tell you, we look forward to work with the finance committee and making sure all the hard questions are asked and that the answers are there, because that's what gives people confidence in what we're doing. And so I absolutely.
Yeah, and we as members, as the public kind of people within the town, we get asked at coffee shops and ahead of town meeting and about this sort of thing, and it's tough for us to say, I don't know, I can't answer your questions. So I'm sorry, Bill, you were going to say something.
Yeah, to Bob's point and your point, with each encounter with some of the boards and committees, I know we're working on how do we structure it so that we don't have these gaps in future years, and there's an absolute clarity as to what the submittal should be and where people should go and in what process. So capital committee, somebody mentioned, we need O&M costs and we need things like that. Those are the kind of things that we're going to ask for next year, and better submittals. And then through the finance committee, we would set up those kind of policies that say, if you're going to do these kind of projects, you need to visit the finance committee and bring this to us. So this is sort of a year in which at least myself, and I know Bob is looking for those improvements, that we're not going to say, well, let's just drop it until next year, but make those improvements. So when we do this next year, there's more clarity to the process and more policy to it. So the CIP itself has a lot of that in it. And I think that that's some of the things we might want to do as a group here, the finance committee. What are the things you might want to see that would come up in your next year's process that could improve it?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's terrific seeing the improvement of the sort of professionalization and systemization of capital. And I agree that that would be something for us to, again, once we get through the budget, to talk about what do we want to see next year for not only capital, but also budget. I've kind of got a running list myself. Okay, so any other new business does anyone else have? I have actually one other thing. Just in terms, I know we have talked about getting minutes up, but Bill, can you just tell us when we might expect to see some of the recordings of these meetings on the town's website or YouTube?
Let me work with Kyle on how that happens and where they go. I have them, they're on this computer that I'm working off of. I record them from Zoom right to this computer. So I'll make sure that they're in good quality, and I'll talk to Kyle about how to post them on the webpage, probably more than likely under the finance committee. And the great thing about that is, given the presentations by the departments, other people, the Board of Selectmen and others can have the advantage of, seeing that, so that it doesn't have to be redundant moving forward. So, but we will get those up, and you do have minutes. We can pick it up at your next meeting that are sort of backlog minutes from last year, and we're still working on the ones from this past year. So I will work with Kyle to get the videos posted. So as we wrap up our process, everything is there for the committee members as you sort of looking at everything to just go online and view.
Great. Thank you so much, Bill. And we have 5 minutes remaining. Are there any other items aside from minutes that we need to discuss, Bill?
No, we have no transfers today.
Okay. So just on the topic of minutes, I think I mentioned before that just what was submitted to us has definitely like some bolded, was it spelling question marks? Was it this person or that person? I mean, do you want us to kind of go through each of those and like make corrections before approving them? Or do you want to try to get some amended versions in front of us for next week? How do you want to handle that? Oh, you're on mute, Bill.
We have those in PDF. We'll get the Word documents together and make the edits as necessary. I think what we'll do in the next meeting is just, I'll pull up the list, and then some of the correspondence I've received by everybody will go in and make notations on that list as to what has to be amended. And on that list, I'll just make a general motion at the top. So you'll have a general motion to approve all the minutes with the notations below each minutes listed. So we can handle it that way, and how it gets edited afterwards isn't really you don't have to worry about that. So
Sounds good.
where people have mentioned that there are corrections that have to be made, you'll have the list of minutes that we have from last year, and then under ones where we find we need to do amendments, we'll just have a notation, and you'll have a general sort of motion to cover them all.
Okay.
I'll get that out
So-
to you in your next packet.
So I would just ask everyone to take one last look through the minutes that were sent to us previously. And if you have any other corrections aside from those minor ones that we just discussed, to make sure that you send them to Bill and myself.
In that regard, they were sent probably a few meetings ago. If you need, I can resend them. Just send me an email and I can do that.
Great.
And thanks for your help with the minutes. It's been a problem for us, and it's a major point of emphasis for Bill and I, and I think that it will reflect very, very strongly on the committee in our town to make sure that, you know, we're setting the example on having all the minutes in place and in the approved, so.
Yeah. Transparency is always a big thing. So whatever we can do to get those out would be great. All right. I don't have anything else to, unless anyone else does, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second it.
All right. All those in favor, Robert,
Aye.
Nate,
Aye.
George,
Aye.
Jack.
Aye.
I am an aye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
See you next week.
Right.
Aye.